Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a big update on a potential negotiation between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin on some type of peace deal with Donald Trump playing the middleman, playing the mediator. And this could be a huge thing for Trump, especially when you look at what Ukraine could be getting, what Russia could be getting, trying to balance it down the middle, not trying to appease one side too much. And you do have an update here. Trump says there will be no U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, adding that possible U.S. security guarantees could be provided by air. And so yesterday we saw Zelensky come in with all of the different EU leaders, and he was very, very clear. He put a high emphasis on security guarantees. Now, Zelensky had previously been talking about not wanting to lose any land. Seems like he knows at this point if there is some type of peace deal, there will be land given up. And at this point, for him, it makes more sense to push for maximum security guarantees, which is a very strange dynamic, admittedly, when you think of the idea of more NATO encroachment into Ukraine, albeit with the Russians potentially getting 15 to 20% of total land area within Ukraine via annexation if this does happen. Because if Ukraine gets these security guarantees, and I would imagine it would be European Union troops and possibly the UK as well. They're talking about troops in Western Ukraine, but that basically puts Ukraine, and what they're trying to is what Zelensky's pushed for, to have it on Article 5 NATO status, which is basically them just being in NATO. The idea that Ukraine would be attacked again, and then Europe would, at that point, deploy troops to help them. That doesn't seem like something that Russia would really want. And then you've also got the idea of demilitarization. What does that look like with potential NATO troops in Ukraine trying to secure it? Would they have to scale down their military for Russia to accept this? And if they don't, will Russia just continue this war? And then on top of that, with what Trump is doing, the idea of U.S. security guarantees, there is a level of negotiation with Zelensky. And okay, well, we're not going to provide you troops, but we'll provide you some type of air support to have ourselves in the region, which a lot of Republicans, by the way, do not want. But this is Trump trying to be flexible, trying to play ball with both Zelensky and Putin, in this case specifically Zelensky, when it comes to the security guarantees, because it seems like Ukraine is really changing their tune. This is very positive, at least from an outside perspective. The idea that they're not demanding all of their land back and Crimea. Now it looks like they're thinking, all right, we're going to lose this land. So if we lose it, let's at least push for heavy security guarantees to try and get us entrenched with Western Europe as much as possible, so Russia is deterred from a reinvasion. Would the Russians be open to negotiating something like that, to where there would be NATO presence within Western Ukraine? That's something to where, well, if they take 20% of the country, maybe they would be open to something like that, because that's how negotiations are. It's a little give and get, but it also depends on the leverage. If they don't like that, do they really have to end the war if they're in a better military position? So you've got that. You also have, I'll just quickly talk about this. You've got Gavin Newsom, and if you watched some of the videos in the past, Gavin Newsom is obsessed with 2028. He wants to be the president. He was campaigning in South Carolina like 3 months ago. I don't think the 2028 primaries are, they're in like 2.5 years. I mean, this is an obsession. And now he's trying to do this Trump caricature, like copy what Trump has said. And this is just total liberal slop. It's rage bait, and Trump needs to ignore it. And I hope Trump, it's very hard for Trump, I understand. But it would be very, very good for Trump if he ignored this. It's completely irrelevant. Newsom is not even a threat to Trump, because Trump can't run again, or he's not going to run in 2028. And it would, I mean, so it just, but even like someone like Vance, he's going after Vance. He wanted to debate Vance. He demanded it. It's 2.5 years before the primaries. What are we doing here? And so if you don't respond to him, it's a desperation look if you don't respond to him. So that's what I would say for Trump. You've got Scott Bessent grilling India for buying Russian oil. Looks like the pressure is being kept up. And of course, well, this relates directly to the negotiations, to the pressure on Russia. And so they want Russia in an event to where, or they want India in the event to where Russia does not accept this peace deal. They want India to stop buying the Russian oil, because if Trump does decide to put sanctions onto Russia, Russia will likely just sell more oil to Eastern countries like India and China. But the hope is that this won't end up mattering, because there's also been talk of upping more tariffs onto India to try and pressure them to stop buying the Russian energy. But I hope this doesn't end up coming to it, because it could be a domestic issue for our economy if you're talking about crude oil going up even more. I mean, the idea is, well, if we get some type of peace deal, the sanctions on Russia, which by the way are still on by the United States, can come off, and crude oil, at least for the next 6 or 7 months, will go down, which will certainly help the economy even more. I mean, the energy prices are already cooperating with Trump pretty heavily. You've got Trump revealing that during negotiations, one of the leaders asked to meet again on the war in a month or two. And this is Trump just saying, with the emphasis, we want to get this done now. We don't want to do this thing to where it drags on. And yeah, right. It's like we're talking. He's met with Putin. He's met with Zelensky. He's trying to set up a meeting with potentially all three of them within the next 2 weeks. They said Zelensky and Putin will meet. And so hopefully this ends up getting solved. But you do have that. You also have this. This is just kind of a map of everything. I know Trump showed Zelensky a map of kind of where everything stood. And this is just some added context. So these are the 4 oblasts right here. This is Crimea at the bottom. These 2 oblasts, the 2 northern oblasts, would be part of the Donbass region. I think it's this area right here, which was prior to the 2022 invasion, partially controlled by some Russian groups. But the idea is that, well, they want Crimea fully recognized. They apparently will give up these 2 northern parts that they control. These northern areas are basically negotiating chips for the Russians. They're going to give them up. They have very little presence there. Remember, this northern area is the only control that Ukraine had of Russia, the Kursk region, which is up there. They don't control it anymore. That would have been a negotiating chip for them. But the idea is, they're looking at least parts of these two oblasts being annexed, and then potentially stopping the invasion in Kherson and Zaporizhia, which are the 2 southern oblasts. And then they're demanding, they want the recognition of sovereignty, Russian rule over Crimea, which was annexed in 2014. What I believe, like right now, so they have 99% of that oblast, 76, 73, 70%. Yeah, so I believe they've got around 20% right now occupied in total land. The question is, what happens to these 2 southern oblasts? So, and it is 19% of Ukraine. So they have 19% of Ukraine. I wonder what the numbers, level out to if this peace plan ends up happening, to where, what do they get, 1/5 of Ukraine? Is that what it's going to be? And then Ukraine gets heavy protection from NATO countries, and also air support from the United States. So maybe that's what ends up happening. I mean, listen, there's going to have to be give and take by both sides, and I know Ukraine is certainly pushing for those security guarantees. And really, why wouldn't they at this point? That's really because you can't trust Russia. There's always potential for a reinvasion, but would the Russians accept NATO troops being in Ukraine? I mean, sure, you get maybe 1/5 of the country, but is it worth it? I mean, they'll have another election, but if they have another election, you think the leader is going to be the newly elected, democratically elected leader of Ukraine is going to be pro-Russian? It's not going to happen. They're going to be pro-Ukrainian, and maybe likely also pro-Western. Whoever gets elected next, whenever they have elections there, because they've been talking about doing that, I know. And then you've got some takeaways here. The leaders presented a relatively united front. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to this public stuff, I don't think you're really going to get... Certainly, we had the fireworks back when Zelensky came the first time, but this is normally how this stuff is going to go. There was the German leader who said, well, we should go for a ceasefire, not a peace deal, thinking Trump, Putin is pressuring everyone into a peace deal. Putin wants the peace deal, and then Trump said, yeah, we'll do a peace deal. We don't need a ceasefire. Normally, a ceasefire facilitates a peace deal, but a lot of times ceasefires get broken. They had previous ceasefires, at least temporary ceasefires on certain things like infrastructure, that immediately got broken. That Russia and Ukraine did. So, ceasefires are kind of useless, but in a sense for Putin, it is definitely, you'd much rather a peace deal because you're the aggressor. You don't want to stop your armies, and then, a ceasefire happens, but there's no potential for a peace deal. So, I think they were pretty united. Trump spoke only in vague terms about security guarantees for Ukraine. Obviously, Trump doesn't want to give Ukraine security guarantees, but this is part of the negotiation. It is what it is. And so if there can be some type of middle ground, which is air support but no ground troops, that's probably what it's going to be, I would imagine, because Ukraine is going to demand it. If they lose 20% of their country or 18% of their country or whatever it ends up being, they're going to want some significant, and also the Western Europe is going to want that as well. I'm sure Western Europe wants to give it to Ukraine. The question is, would Russia accept that? And if they don't want that, would they just continue the war? And what is their current standing and their current military health in continuing the war? Is it worth it for them? So those are all questions that hopefully the idea is they're pressured to the point to where they're ready to negotiate. And even if there is NATO presence within Ukraine, I mean, you have to say, I mean, that's even, you talk about it being a deterrent, but this is where it becomes a bigger problem to where, well, what if there is some type of reinvasion or there is maybe it's a false flag issue to where now NATO troops are involved with Russia. If they do have a presence within Ukraine, it balloons to a bigger situation because pretty much all of Europe is now involved. I know they're supposed to be there as a deterrent. Like, why would Russia do this if these are their NATO troops protecting it? But you really get into a very pressurized situation and a very delicate situation if you're talking about doing that. You also have this Trump engaging in some shuttle diplomacy with Putin. Well, apparently Trump was calling Putin or called Putin or wanted to call Putin during the meeting and then called him right after. And so there is clear dialogue with Trump and Putin, and Zelensky said that Trump has done a great job. And so Trump right now is the ultimate facilitator in all of this for sure, 100%. Afterward, Mr. Trump brought Zelensky and other European leaders into the Oval Office to describe his discussion with Putin. So Trump did call Putin and then was talking to the European leaders after he called them. So he was talking to Europe, then he called Putin, then he talked to Europe about the phone call with Putin. Russia and Ukraine will work on possible Putin-Zelensky meeting. Well, I think it's being facilitated by Trump, and Trump might also be involved in it within the next 2 weeks, is what I heard. You can't bank on it for sure. Zelensky said Ukraine would buy $90 billion of American arms. Well, right, you have to still, especially considering the war is still going on, there's no ceasefire or anything like that, there still has to be pressure applied to Russia. That's why Trump, whether you want to say he rearmed Ukraine, it's more so selling of weapons to where we're not giving them, like under Biden, all of it was given, and it was older weaponry, but still it was given. Now there's the mineral deal. Now they're straight up having to buy, the European countries are straight up having to buy weapons from us and then give them to Ukraine. But you have to keep this going because there has to be pressure applied to Russia. During negotiations, you can't say, okay, we're going to stop giving stuff to Ukraine because we've got negotiations ongoing. That would only embolden Russia to demand more, gain leverage. So there has to still be the pressure on to Russia to say, listen, if you walk away, we're going to be supplying Ukraine. For as much as people don't want to hear that, it would be a pressure tactic to force Russia to come to an agreement on something, so that you have to hold up the idea that you are going to be putting these heavy tariffs on India. You're going to be trying to pressure them to stop buying Russian oil. You are going to threaten other Eastern countries who are used by Russia. And I mean, you saw what Bessent said. He was saying that it really was an arbitrage situation to where they're buying the cheap oil from Russia and then reselling it at a markup. That's what India was doing because Russia, wasn't able to work with the Western countries for the better part of the last 3.5 years because of their invasion. Especially the United States, where the heavy sanctions are still on Russia. And imagine if those got alleviated, what that would do. So there's a lot to think about, but yeah, you have to keep the pressure on Russia in a sense, especially recently. To me, it seems like there's movement with the land giving up. It seems like Zelensky's like, all right, we're gonna have to give up this land. He hasn't said it formally, but it's all about security guarantees. There's very little talk of we want our land back. It's in our constitution. We cannot cede land. There's not a lot of talk about that. It's we're going to give up 20% or 15% or 18% of the country. We want the security guarantees. And basically what Zelensky is insinuating, it's like a shadow NATO membership is what he wants. Because I was being told that, he wants basically an Article 5 if something happens to Ukraine. So it's you want a shadow membership to NATO. You think Russia's going to accept that? It seems like there could be some hangups in terms of these negotiations. And then what happens to the Ukrainian military? Are they going? My guess is there's a compromise to where they downscale in size. I don't think they're going to be fully demilitarized. And then also I haven't heard any talks about a potential demilitarized zone, but I would imagine that's something that would have to come as well. And who patrols that? NATO troops? You think Russia would like that? That's a very delicate situation. Yeah, it can be a deterrent for sure from a reinvasion, but it's right on the border with Russia, the new border, which would be along, those 4 oblasts. It's, we'll see what ends up happening. But the point is, Trump is the facilitator. He's really trying to end this. He's trying to give both of these countries a good deal. He's had a very amicable relationship with both of the countries, and they're on good terms, and he's on good terms with Zelensky. He's on good terms with Putin. This is what you have to do if you want to solve this. There needs to be dialogue, and I think there's some pretty big hurdles, but at a certain point, this is more of an underlying thing. If the Ukrainian military is exhausted, what other option does Zelensky really have at this point, rather than to come to some type of agreement and try and force as much security guarantees as he can to try and protect Ukraine from a reinvasion? That's a component that depends on their current military situation under the hood and how it impacts these negotiations. Because if they're dealing with a situation where we all know that they're down on men, to what degree, it needs to be contextualized, because everyone says they have no men left, and they've been saying it for a year, and they're still fighting. So, and they're still getting weaponry from the West, and that's not going to stop until there is actually a peace deal. Because again, you're not going to give the Russians leverage in negotiations. You're going to say, well, if Russia wants to back out and they want to play hardball, we're going to arm them Ukraine even more. It's because it's a pressure tactic. You want to give them. That's why there's all this sanction threat against Russia. I don't think Trump is really going to impose heavy sanctions on Russia. But it's tough. If this falls apart, I wonder how the pieces get picked up from here. Like, if this does continue from this point, you continue to fund Ukraine. That's an option. You can back out completely. That's another option. But do you really go balls to the wall and start and impose even heavier sanctions on Russia and impose a crazy tariff on India to force them to stop buying Russian oil? Because that seems like it's another multi-month, sludge that potentially will have a domestic economic impact. That's a problem. I don't think Trump really wants that. Obviously, Trump doesn't want that. But would he actually push for that if Russia plays really hard and says, we want no NATO presence in Ukraine? That's what this entire war was about, was getting rid of NATO influence from Ukraine. So then where does that leave Trump in the United States? I mean, the Western European countries have no choice but to still support Ukraine if they want to keep Ukraine under Western influence. So that's really kind of the reality of this situation, and we'll see what ends up happening. But either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you like the video down below. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.